Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today lives in Austin, Texas, with his wife and wolfpack of 4 rescue dogs. He loves to travel and has incorporated his experiences into his writing. He enjoys works of fiction and nonfiction with a heavy emphasis on history, adventure, and classics. His passion for history is on display in his debut series, The Last Roman. Welcome to Authors Over 50, BK Greenwood.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the intro.
BK, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
I think that's a great question. I've been working on it for 23 plus years, and I always send it out to family and friends, and they would like it, and then I would do some tweaks on it, some edits, maybe change the ending, change different parts of it, and send it back out. It would give me feedback whether they liked it or not, and so it was kind of a never-ending process. I think eventually we decided that it needed to get pushed out the door, kind of like your kids would get pushed out the door when they get old enough. And so we did that. I decided to hire an editor, find a cover designer, and get that done. This was one of the things I think COVID, silver lining from COVID, where I didn't travel as much. I spent more time at home, and I was able to really focus on getting it, finished. And then the question was, whether you go independent or whether you go with a publisher. And at this time, since it had taken so long to get it out, I didn't want to spend another year, 2-3 years in the traditional publishing cycle. So decided to self-publish it last year, and here we are.
Well, you certainly became quite prolific after writing your first book. Where does all this inspiration come from, and how many books have you written so far?
Book 2 was, I would say, about 80% done over those 20 plus years. So that one was pretty easy to get out the door. Book 3, I wrote pretty much, which was the finale of the series. I wrote pretty much from scratch starting in November. I think because the story arc was in my head and was there, it was pretty easy to put down on paper. I had the characters developed, and that's really a major part of writing as well. So I didn't have to worry about that. So I think it just flowed, and I really kind of put a goal for myself to have it all done within 1 year. I wanted to have a full series established as a new writer, so that anybody who read book 1 could immediately go into book 2 and 3, and it really would have something established. In addition to that, I do have a novella of 4 short stories that is part of the series as well that I published. Those were more short stories that didn't find a place in the series itself, so I was able to kind of put those together and put them out. So I guess technically I have 4 books, but it's 3 full books and a novella are out being published. So.
Well, that's a great idea. There's so many of us who leave chapters on the cutting room floor. Maybe we could make those into novellas to go along with our books.
Yeah, I think my series lends itself to that because I do flashbacks chapters where they go back to a period of history because they have immortal characters in there. And so if I write a story in a period of time that just doesn't find its way into the story, into the main novels, it's really easy to kind of just make that a short story. And I usually will do that like a reader magnet. I'll give that away for free to people to kind of entice them to get into the series.
I know you moved around a lot as a child. I think you went to 7 elementary schools and depended on books for stability. But do you think being in all those new places aroused your sense of adventure as well?
Yeah, I think moving around really was an important part of my development and my sense of adventure, like you mentioned. We moved down to Florida for a bit, and then we drove down to Florida, and then we drove from New Hampshire to Arizona when I was a young child, and that's where I eventually went to school. And so I think it really I seen different parts of the country and seeing different cultures, and even within the United States was really kind of influential in my thought process and my development. And then, like you said, I moved around different schools, so it was really wasn't great at making friends. So what I tended to do is just read a ton. And so, like I always like to mention, when you pick up a book, it's kind of your new best friend, and it doesn't, make fun of you. It doesn't, you're immediately best friends with it when you start reading. So to me, that was a really comfort that I turned to when I was, especially in my elementary and junior high days. So.
Well, one thing I'm always interested in hearing from our authors is their character names. How did they choose their character names? Did you have to do research into Roman names?
Yeah, I did a little research into Roman names. They have usually three names, just like, we do, a first, middle, and a last name, and they're very specific in what they mean, a family name or a familiar name. I also I talked to people that were very intimate in that language and the culture. Historians. I got some input from them as well. And then a lot of the other characters in the book are kind of biblical names, so that's pretty easy. You can do research on that pretty quickly and find, your Thomases, Isabellas, Rebecca's, those type of names that are fairly very common in the Bible. So it was pretty easy from that perspective.
What about editing anything out of the book? You talked about your novellas as being places that you have taken work from the book. Was there anything that didn't make it into the novellas that was edited completely out of your books?
Yeah, I think when I first started writing, back in my 20s, I was much more verbose. I would spend a lot more words trying to get the same message across that I do now. I think my initial novel, checked in at around 110,000 words. And when I published book one for the series, it was closer to 75 or 80,000 words. So I really took about a third of it out. And really what it came down to is just cleaning it up and making it, a lot of people that read my book find that it's very fast paced. It's kind of like reading a Netflix series, it goes from scene to scene. And I don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of expose on what the sunshine looked like in the morning, looked like in the trees and things like that. And that I think is just maturity and then just finding my writing style. And so early on, it was really hard to kill a sentence or a word or a paragraph because you wrote it. It's like you're a kid, you don't want to get rid of it. But I found the more experienced I became, the easier that became, and it was much easier just to clean it up. And you find that you can get mine is really story and action based, so getting people caught up in descriptives is not really where I'm at. Now, some people like that. That's what they like to read, but that's just not my style. So.
Well, you knew you were writing this series. How did you determine the plot for each book and what was going to happen in each of your books?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not as much of a planner. I'm kind of a pantser. I kind of fly by the seat of my pants, but I do know the general arc of the story. So I knew where it wanted to end, and I knew kind of the ending for book two. I kind of just figure it out as we go along. What I write, like what I think the characters would do in that moment. And there's sometimes you go down one-way streets or dead-end streets, and you got to come back, and that's where the editing comes into effect. But for the most part, I just kind of try to follow the natural arc. I do have some things I know have to happen along the way. So I would say milestones or waypoints that we have to hit. But I'm very much a kind of just let the story organically flow out. I don't plan it, super tightly. I basically have an Excel spreadsheet that tracks the chapters, and that's probably the extent. I know there are other people that outline right down to the every single chapter, every single place, everything like that, and that's great. I think whatever works for each writer is the best way for you to do, and that's why when people ask advice in writing, my advice in writing is don't take anything as being gospel, right? Whatever works for you works for you. Sometimes being a planner works, or sometimes not being a planner, or sometimes dream sequences, opening with a dream sequence, or using prologues. Whatever works for your story is what's important, not what other people say are the rules. There are rules, but you should be pushing the boundaries on them, I think. So.
Well, speaking of breaking rules, when you decided you were going to self-publish, how did you learn about this whole process? Because it can be quite complicated.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Google obviously was my best friend. Also part of a lot of Facebook groups to just, learning and asking questions from other people, trial by error. And I tend to just kind of run forward and try to learn as best I can from some of the mistakes I made. But there's a lot of good resources and tools out there. I watched a lot of YouTube videos from other self-published authors that gave advice on how to do advertising, how to make sure you market your book in the correct way and so forth. So that to me was very, very helpful. And then, like I said, trial by error. I would learn, hey, this Twitter feed that says they're going to put your book out to 100,000 isn't necessarily as great sounding as it is. So you just trial and error from that perspective, and then leaning on a couple of people that I've met through the different social media aspects and learning from them and sharing. Right now, I'm pretty big on just going in and posting what I've learned from the year plus that I've done, and how I've been able to market some of the books and be able to get pretty decent sales on book one. So
tell us about that, because a lot of our authors don't like to market themselves and their books. They would prefer to be writing. Is there anything publicity wise that's worked for you or that definitely didn't work?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple things. I mean, I've done a number of podcasts. I think that helps get your name out there. I don't think it's a direct, it doesn't have a direct fall through to sales, but it has if people hear or see you on a podcast, then if they see an ad that you're doing on Facebook, then I think that you need to hit people 5, 6, 7 times with the same thing before they actually hit a button and purchase. So that, I think, just getting the exposure out there and getting used to having those conversations is important. I found, the one thing I think didn't work for me was blog tours. I did, several blog tours where went out to people and I really didn't see any increase in sales. I did see some reviews that came in from some of those. So I think that's an important aspect. But I think to me, it's kind of like making sure you spread your efforts across different boundaries. Like to me, making sure you build up your reviews, getting to, different milestones, 50 to 100. I don't think it has the cachet that people say, and all of a sudden Amazon starts marketing you more. But when people go look at your book, if you have significant reviews, then it kind of helps them be more comfortable in purchasing and moving forward. I use a lot of Facebook ads. That's primarily my number one place of getting exposure out there. I dabble in Amazon ads every now and then, but it can be really, really tough, and you could quickly burn through your budget and not get any output from that. So it really is search word dependent for that. I'm building social media, so I have a pretty decent following now on Twitter, and I think that's a really important place to just be able to have bounce ideas off people and be able to get a little bit of exposure there. So it's really across the board, and I do a lot of in-person things. I set up at farmers markets here locally in Austin, so I do 3 or 4 different farmers markets and other type of venues where I just sit there and sign books, and sell them to people. And we're actually coming up. We're doing one with a brewery. We're going to have a once a month of beer, brew, and books every month on the first Sunday of every month. We're going to invite different authors there and have some fun, having a couple beers and eating a little bit of food and selling some books, hopefully. So just trying different things. I definitely find myself spending way more time marketing than I do writing, which is sometimes a problem. So.
I think it really does cut into our writing time, just trying to market ourselves and do podcasts or blogs or, trying to get the word out there. It does eat up a lot of our time, but I love thinking out of the box, and beer and brews and books sounds like a great way to do that.
Thanks.
What about telling us about your book now, and then read a few paragraphs for us so that we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Yeah, so my book is a mixture of historical fiction, modern thriller. So I always refer to the movie Highlander from the 80s as a way that it kind of has a modern flair to it, but it has some flashback chapters. And then the second part of it is very similar to like Jason Bourne. So it's like a modern thriller cat and mouse game through the three books. And then about every other chapter, there's a flashback to a period in history. So it kind of it satisfies both people that like that modern type of stuff, but also if you like historical fiction, it helps with that. And it gives you a little bit of character development for some of the main characters. Yeah, and I'll read just a chapter or two from the first chapter of book one. So Marcus moved along the faltering line and soon encountered the largest man he had ever seen, hacking his way through the thinning ranks. A legionnaire tried to bar his path, but the ogre swung his massive blade, catching the soldier just below his jaw. A crimson arc of blood sprayed from the fatal wound, much of it splattering across Marcus' face and chest. Behind the giants were more barbarians, advanced to exploit the breach. Marcus grabbed the shield of a fallen soldier and rushed the behemoth, who welcomed the attack with a vicious blow. The force drove Marcus to one knee and nearly knocked him unconscious. Marcus raised his shield to protect his head and shoulders and thrust his sword upward. The point struck metal, so he shoved it harder until he felt the blade dig into the soft underside of the trunk-like arm. Marcus could hear the giant's howl above the din of the battle and knew the retribution was near. Another thunderous blast crashed into the shield, the metal and banded leather splintering from the attack. The next blow would surely rip Marcus asunder. So that's just kind of a little bit of a hint, is a little bit of the battle that happens at the beginning of the scene. Of the book, of the initial character Marcus, and when he has his initial encounter with the barbarian army. So,
Well, that's very dramatic and gets us right there into the scene with you. I know that you read so much as a child. Do you still make time to read? And if so, what genres do you read?
Yeah, I probably don't read as much as I should. I always have it on my it's always on my to-do list to do a certain number of minutes of reading a day, and it's probably one of the things that falls off. As far as genres, I kind of am really open. I think in the last year to 2 years, I've primarily focused on other independent authors. I find that I've met so many authors, and I think the James Pattersons of the world probably have plenty of readers, and they don't need me reading for them anymore. So I really tend to focus on my peers and trying to read and give feedback on either their whip that they're working on or a new novel that they just let release, so that I can do reviews for them and kind of give them feedback on their work. So to me, I would say 90% of that is in that field. It ranges from historical fiction, some fantasy, from the individuals that I interact with. And to me, that's a way of supporting my fellow authors that have supported me over the last year or two as well. So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship there. And the more authors I meet, the more material I get to read. So it keeps me busy.
I feel the same way. I buy a book from everybody that I interview on this podcast, and I listen to a lot of audio books because I ride my bike or I travel to a book event, across the country. And so I have a lot of time then to listen to books, and it's so great for those books to feed us. They may not be anything like the book that we're writing, but it'll trigger a childhood memory or description or something that we can use in our own work.
Sure. That's a great way to go about it.
If you could ask your author idol a question, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting one. I would think it's just how did they maintain their momentum, and how did they stay focused on what it is they wanted to do. I think there's different people take different paths. There's a lot of people that become authors later on in life, and how did you continue that 20 to 30 years worth of effort, and because a lot of times we see someone like, oh, they're an overnight success, like they launched a book and all of a sudden it's huge. we don't realize that they wrote 5 or 6 books ahead of that didn't really do that well, and all of a sudden those become big because the people, become famous. So how did they maintain that focus over, day in and day out? And especially once you become famous, all of a sudden now people are not famous but successful. People are now depending on you to write more books and to put out more material. And how do you maintain that focus and that drive and that energy to do that? Because I think writing as a passion is different than writing as a living, and getting forced to write something is a much different thing than just writing it on your own organically. And so to me, I would ask about how did they maintain that balance?
I think that would be a great question for any of us. And I wonder if all the readers that you're now producing for your books, if there's something about you that they wouldn't know just from reading your books.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of people don't know that, this is a part-time gig for me. I have a full-time job that's, in the tech industry that keeps me pretty busy most of the time. And it can vary. Sometimes I have a little bit more time to spend on the books and marketing. Sometimes I go a week or two and I don't have any ability at all to spend much time on that. And so to me, that's, I think people think of you as an author and they read your book and they're like, oh, that's what they do all day. They sit there and, typing away at their computer and staring at their ceiling, reading books, researching. And a lot of times what it is you just squeezing in time to try to get something done while the rest of your life is going on or without you. So it's not, for a lot of us authors, it's not just an author. We're not just like kind of Hemingway with a pipe in our mouth, kind of looking out into the mountains and then sit down and write. It's some have that ability, but at least I don't have that ability at the moment. So.
Not many people do. Sometimes those of us who are in retirement still have too much to do to sit down and write all the time.
Yeah.
Well, BK, our writers over 50 are a unique set. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above? Maybe something you wish you'd heard when you started out?
I think I would just say that, to me, we have a lot of knowledge and experience to share with people. And to me, that's the number one thing is don't look at it as a negative that you're a writer over 50. I would look at it as a positive, and being able to share your experiences that you've had throughout your life. There are things that I write about, I think now at my age, that I probably wouldn't have thought about writing about in my 20s. And some of the emotional aspects of your characters will really kind of come through when you have a different viewpoint. When you're 20s, you don't think about things like you do like when you're a little bit older. And so you have a different view on family, you have a different view on stability, you have a different view on the world than you do when you're younger. So just share that experience with people, and people may resonate with people and it may not, but at least it's your opportunity to do that. So
I think that's great advice and a perfect place for us to end today. And I just thank you so much for being with us and sharing your journey. And we're excited that you're now one of our authors over 50.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and best of luck in your future podcasts as well.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend, and check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.